What if social media algorithms have inadvertently given us the blueprint to help us understand where our thoughts are coming from? If you think about it, pieces of content on social media and our thoughts have the same objective. They're trying to keep us engaged as long as possible. They're fighting for our attention. And so the most efficient way of doing that is by figuring out better ways to keep us engaged, then it's very natural to imagine that they both evolved in exactly the same kind of way. What happens on social media? You have a bunch of creators create different pieces of content. The platform shows these pieces of content to you, the user, and the one that keeps you engaged the most is the one that is then shown to other people, assuming that it will also keep them engaged. Hence, the platform is constantly trying to optimize for engagement time. Now, why would the body do that with thoughts? If you think of each thought as just a representation of a biological or psychological need that you have. So let's imagine that there are hundreds of thousands of biological and psychological needs that you have. There's insecurities about your safety, food and warmth and social status and a million other things. And it's just not enough for these needs to appear in the mind as needs. And so maybe evolutionarily, these needs have figured out exactly what content creators have figured out. That is, in order to keep the attention for long enough for us to do something about that need, it needs to be presented to us in a compelling enough way so we decide to choose amongst those hundreds of thousands of needs and pay attention to anyone. So if I have 100 needs under the hood, they will manifest themselves in my stream of consciousness in more and more dramatic ways in order to fight for our attention. And like a social media feed, they're just being thrown into a stream of consciousness. And the ones that elicit the highest emotional response, which is kind of what happens on social media, the ones that elicit the highest emotional response are the ones which our brains will then stay stuck on, hopefully for long enough to actually solve the problem and do something about it. And so if you look at it from this framework, it makes a lot of sense why our thoughts are compulsive, why we can stay stuck in them, and why we tend to exaggerate them way out of proportion. Because over a period of time, our biological needs have understood that they need to grab the attention of the prefrontal cortex, because that's kind of the central processing unit of the brain. It decides which things you are going to pay attention to and which things you're going to allocate resources to and resolve. So if these are all self-competing needs and they need to grab your attention, they need to scare you enough to get you to do something about about taking care of them. And so it's absolutely conceivable and likely that social media algorithms, in trying to figure out how to keep you engaged the most, have given us a blueprint for understanding where thoughts come from. And just like content creators are forced to create pieces of content that elicit a very high emotional response to keep you engaged, our needs have also had to do that consistently in order to grab our attention. Maybe this is why people who have less problems tend to panic less, because they make immediate decisions and solve problems. So the total number of needs isn't as high as somebody else who chooses to ignore or avoid their problems. And because they're solving so many of these problems, the problems no longer need to represent themselves in ways which are scary or anxiety driving, and because there's fewer of them to choose from. And I think there's a lot here in this concept to understand. And I'm not exactly sure what it is, but it's a very intriguing thought that's been on my mind quite a lot.